At 78, she lost her home overnight. Then a forgotten Bible revealed a place no one knew existed. The papers were signed at her own kitchen table. The smell of cinnamon still hung in the air. 3 weeks later, a stranger stood at her door and told her the house was no longer hers. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She just stood there, while her dog pressed against her leg, as if he already knew something she didn't. If you were in her place, would you have trusted that moment, or fought to hold on? The kettle had been humming for a while before Eleanor noticed. It sat on the back burner, a thin ribbon of steam curling up toward the cabinet above, carrying the faint smell of metal and warm water. The kitchen itself held a different scent, cinnamon from the jar she kept by the window, and something older, quieter. Paper, wood, time. Eleanor Whitaker stood at the table with one hand resting on its worn edge. The wood was smooth in places where hands had passed over it for decades, and rough in others where the finish had faded. Her husband had sanded it himself one summer long ago. She could still remember the sound, the steady scrape, the dust settling in the afternoon light. Across from her, Daniel flipped through a stack of papers. He didn't rush. He never did. He moved with the same calm precision he'd always had, even as a boy. His sleeves were rolled neatly to his elbows, his watch catching the light each time he turned a page. He tapped the stack lightly against the table to straighten it. "It's nothing complicated," he said, without looking up. "Just a small adjustment. Property taxes have changed again. This will keep things manageable." Eleanor nodded, though she hadn't asked a question. She lowered herself into the chair slowly, careful of her knees. Rufus lay stretched out near the doorway, his head resting on his paws, eyes open. He watched Daniel more than he watched her. Eleanor reached for her glasses, sliding them down from the top of her head. She glanced at the papers. Lines of small print filled the pages. Words pressed close together, tight and formal. The kind of language that never seemed to say anything clearly. Daniel turned one sheet toward her and tapped near the bottom. "Right here," he said. "And then one more on the next page. That's all." She hesitated, just for a moment. Not because she didn't trust him. She did. She always had. He was her younger brother, after all. The one who handled things. The one who understood how the world worked now, with its forms and offices and rules that changed faster than she could keep up. Still, something about the papers felt heavy. The kettle clicked softly behind her as the heat shut off. The sound made her turn her head. For a second, she thought about getting up, pouring the water, taking a breath. But Daniel was waiting. She picked up the pen. It felt lighter than she expected. Her hand trembled just slightly as she lowered it to the page. The tip hovered above the line where her name was already printed, neat and certain. Eleanor Whitaker. She signed beneath it. The motion was slow, deliberate, the way she had always signed her name, each letter shaped carefully, as if it still mattered how it looked. Daniel slid the next page forward. "Just here," he said again. She signed that one too. Rufus shifted then, lifting his head. His ears flicked forward, his gaze moving from Daniel to Eleanor and back again. He didn't get up. He just watched. Daniel gathered the papers, tapping them into a neat stack once more. A small smile crossed his face, quick and satisfied. "That should take care of things," he said. Eleanor removed her glasses and set them on the table. Her fingers lingered on the frames. "Well," she said quietly, "that's good then." Daniel stood, smoothing his sleeves down. He glanced around the kitchen, his eyes moving over the familiar details. The old cabinets, the narrow window above the sink, the jar of cinnamon. "You've kept it just the same," he said. Eleanor followed his gaze. There wasn't much reason to change it. He nodded, though it didn't seem like an answer he needed. A few minutes later, he was gone. The door closed with a soft click behind him, and the house settled back into itself. The quiet returned, deeper now, as if it had been waiting just outside. Eleanor stood where she was for a long time. Rufus rose and walked over to her, his nails tapping lightly against the floor. He pressed his side against her leg, solid and warm. She rested her hand on his head without looking down. "Come on," she murmured. "Let's have some tea." She moved slowly to the stove, lifting the kettle, pouring the water into her cup. The steam rose again, carrying that same faint scent. Nothing had changed. Not yet. 3 weeks passed. They moved the way weeks often do at her age, quietly, without much to mark them. Mornings with coffee by the window. Afternoons spent tending the small patch of garden out back. Evenings with the radio low, more for company than for listening. The papers didn't cross her mind again. Not really. Until the knock came. It was mid-morning. The light outside was soft, filtered through a thin layer of clouds. Eleanor had just finished wiping down the counter when she heard it. 3 firm raps on the front door. Rufus was on his feet before she was. He moved toward the door, not barking, but alert. His posture changed. Head high, ears forward. Eleanor dried her hands on a towel and walked slowly down the short hallway. The floor creaked under her weight in the same familiar places. She opened the door. A man stood on the porch. Mid-40s, maybe. Clean-shaven, dark suit. He held a folder tucked neatly under one arm. "Mrs. Whitaker?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes." He offered a polite smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sorry to come unannounced," he said. "My name is Thomas Grady. I'm here on behalf of the bank." Something in the way he said it made the air feel thinner. Eleanor's hand tightened slightly on the edge of the door. "The bank?" she repeated. He opened the folder, pulling out a document. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," he said. "This property has been placed under foreclosure due to a secondary mortgage agreement. The terms have not been met, and the bank has exercised its right to seize the asset." The words came out smooth, practiced. Eleanor stared at him. "I don't understand," she said. He nodded, as if he had expected that. "There was a loan taken against the property," he explained. "The documentation was signed and filed. Payments have not been made. The process has been completed." She shook her head slowly. "No, that's not right. I don't have a loan." He glanced down at the paper, then back up. "The signature is yours, Mrs. Whitaker." He turned the document slightly, just enough for her to see. Her name. Clear, undeniable. Eleanor Whitaker. The same careful letters she had written at the kitchen table. Her hand slipped from the doorframe. For a moment, she thought she might sit down right there on the porch. The world seemed to tilt, just slightly, as if something beneath it had shifted. She began, but the words didn't come. The man continued, his tone unchanged. "You will have 30 days to vacate the property. Instructions are included here." He extended the document toward her. She didn't take it at first. Rufus stepped closer, pressing himself against her leg again. His body was firm, steady, real. Eleanor reached out and accepted the paper. It felt heavier than it should have. "I'm very sorry," the man said. Then he stepped back, gave a small nod, and turned to leave. Eleanor stood in the doorway as he walked down the path, his shoes making soft sounds against the gravel. He reached his car, opened the door, and drove away without looking back. The engine faded. The quiet returned. Eleanor didn't move. The paper hung loosely in her hand. The edges trembled slightly, though she wasn't aware of it. Rufus leaned into her again, his weight grounding her in place. She stared out at the empty drive. The house behind her felt exactly the same, and yet, it no longer belonged to her. Eleanor stood in the doorway long after the car had disappeared. The gravel path lay empty. The trees beyond the yard barely moved, their leaves hanging still in the soft morning air. Somewhere far off, a crow called once, then fell silent again. She didn't step outside. She didn't step back in either. Rufus shifted beside her, pressing his shoulder more firmly against her leg, as if reminding her where she was. His tail stayed low, unmoving. His eyes moved, though, back and forth, scanning the yard, then lifting to her face. Eleanor finally blinked. Her hand tightened slightly around the document. The paper made a faint, dry sound. She looked down at it, though the words no longer seemed to form anything she could follow. 30 days. The number sat there, quiet and certain. She turned slowly and stepped back into the house. The door closed behind her with a soft, familiar click. The same sound it had always made. Nothing about it had changed. She stood just inside the entryway, her eyes moving across the room as if she were seeing it for the first time. The chair by the window. The small table with the lamp that leaned slightly to one side. The narrow rug, worn thin in the center. Everything exactly where it had always been. Rufus walked ahead of her, then stopped in the middle of the room and turned back, waiting. When she didn't move, he came closer again, brushing against her knee. "I'm here," she murmured, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to. She walked into the living room. Her hand reached out, almost without thinking, and rested on the back of the old armchair. The leather was cracked in places, softened in others. Her husband had spent years in that chair, reading the newspaper, dozing in the late afternoons. She could almost see him there. For a moment, she stood very still, her hand pressing gently into the worn surface, as if it might hold her steady. Then she moved on. Room to room. The kitchen again, where the teacup still sat on the table, half full, the surface of the tea now cooled and still. The faint smell of cinnamon lingered in the air, unchanged. She picked up the cup and carried it to the sink. Her movements were careful, measured, as though she were performing something she had done 1,000 times and had to get right. The water ran. The cup was rinsed, set aside. Routine. Something to hold on to. Rufus followed her closely now, no longer drifting off to his usual spots. He stayed within a few steps, his nails tapping lightly against the floor, then stopping when she stopped. They moved up the narrow staircase. The wood creaked under her weight in the same places it always had. She paused halfway up, her hand gripping the railing. For a second, she thought about turning back. But she didn't. The bedroom was just as she had left it that morning. The bed neatly made. The curtains drawn halfway, letting in a soft, gray light. On the dresser, a row of small things, her watch, a comb, a photograph in a simple frame. She walked over and picked up the photograph. It was an old one, faded at the edges. She and her husband standing in front of the house, years younger, the paint on the porch still fresh behind them. He had his arm around her shoulders. She was smiling in a way she hadn't in a long time. Eleanor traced the edge of the frame with her thumb. "This was ours," she said quietly. Rufus sat down beside her, looking up, his head tilted slightly. She set the photograph back down. The word was lingered in the air. She moved to the window and looked out over the yard. The garden sat just beyond the back fence. Rows of soil she had turned herself, plants she had tended through seasons. The tomatoes were just beginning to ripen. She had been watching them closely, checking them each morning. She stared at them now, trying to understand how something could still be growing when everything else had already been taken. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, smaller somehow. She turned away. The rest of the afternoon passed in fragments. She drifted back downstairs, then up again, then down once more. Each room held her for a moment, then released her. She touched things without meaning to, door frames, tabletops, the edge of a cabinet, as if confirming they were still real. Rufus never left her side. Once he went to the front door and stood there, looking at it, then back at her, waiting, expecting something. She didn't move. "Not today," she said softly. Evening came slowly. The light outside shifted, turning from pale gray to a softer, deeper shade. Shadows stretched across the floor, settling into the corners of the room. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table again. The same chair. The same place where she had signed her name. The papers were still there, folded now, placed near the edge of the table. She hadn't moved them far. She hadn't been able to. She reached out and touched them lightly. Her name was on those pages. That was enough. Rufus lay down at her feet, but he didn't close his eyes. He watched her, his ears flicking at every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the house settling. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she listened. To the quiet. To the way the house sounded when she wasn't moving through it. It felt different now. Not louder. Not emptier. Just distant. As if it had already begun to let her go. That night, she went to bed without turning on the radio. She lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling, watching the faint patterns of shadow shift as the light outside faded completely. The mattress felt the same. The pillow felt the same. But sleep didn't come. Every small sound pulled her awake. The tick of the clock downstairs, the whisper of wind against the siding, the soft movement of Rufus as he shifted on the floor near the bed. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see him. He was lying there, facing the door, watching, guarding, as if something might come, or as if something had already arrived. Eleanor closed her eyes, then opened them again. The darkness felt unfamiliar. She waited, for sleep, for understanding, for something to settle inside her. But nothing did. The house held its shape around her, quiet and unchanged. And yet somewhere beneath that stillness, something had already begun to loosen, as if the walls themselves knew. She did not belong to this place anymore. And soon, it would stop pretending she did. Morning came without ceremony. A pale light slipped through the curtains, thin and colorless. Eleanor had not really slept. She had drifted in and out of something shallow, never fully gone, never fully awake. When she opened her eyes, the room looked the same, but her body felt heavier, as if the night had settled into her bones. Rufus was already up. He stood by the bedroom door, still facing outward, as if he had kept watch the entire night. When she moved, he turned his head, his ears softening just a little. "Morning," she said, though her voice came out quieter than she expected. She sat up slowly, the familiar motions, swinging her legs over the side of the bed, reaching for the robe draped over the chair, felt slightly out of place, like movements practiced in a room that no longer belonged to her. Downstairs, the house greeted her with the same quiet. "Coffee first." She filled the kettle again, set it on the stove. The small routine steadied her hands. Rufus stayed close, watching her movements, his body angled toward her like a shadow that had decided not to leave. The papers were still on the table. She didn't look at them. Not yet. Instead, she poured the hot water over the grounds and stood there, waiting for the slow drip, the faint smell rising into the air. Something about that smell, warm, bitter, familiar, helped her think. There was one place she needed to go. She knew it before she finished her first cup. The drive into town felt longer than usual. The road curved the same way it always had. The same fences, the same mailboxes, the same stretches of open field. But everything looked slightly off, as if the world had shifted by an inch and hadn't told her. Rufus sat upright in the passenger seat, his posture rigid. He didn't rest his head like he usually did. He watched the road ahead, alert, quiet. "You remember this way," Eleanor murmured. He didn't respond, but his ears flicked forward. The town came into view slowly. Low buildings, a few cars parked along the street, the small grocery store with its faded sign. Everything exactly where it had always been. Except now it felt like somewhere she was passing through. Daniel's office sat near the corner of a small shopping strip. A wide glass front, too clean, too bright, the kind of place that reflected everything back at you. Eleanor parked a little farther down than usual. She sat in the car for a moment, both hands resting on the steering wheel. Her fingers tightened, then loosened. "All right," she said under her breath. She stepped out. Rufus stayed in the car. He watched her through the window, his eyes following every movement. "I won't be long," she told him. He didn't look convinced. Inside, the air felt different, cooler, sharper. It carried the faint scent of cleaning solution and something synthetic, something that didn't belong to places where people lived. A woman at the front desk looked up, bright smile, too quick. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Daniel Whitaker," Eleanor said. The woman hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "He's in a meeting. I'll wait." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The woman glanced toward the hallway, then back at her. "Let me check," she said, already standing. Eleanor moved past the desk before she could say anything else. She walked down the short hallway, her steps slow but steady. The sound of her shoes against the polished floor echoed faintly. Daniel's office door was open. He sat behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, a phone pressed to his ear. He raised one finger when he saw her. "Wait." Eleanor didn't sit. She stood in front of his desk, her hands folded loosely in front of her. Daniel finished his call a moment later. "Yeah," he said into the phone. "We'll talk later." He hung up and leaned forward slightly, offering a small, practiced smile. "Walt," he said, "I was just about to call you." Eleanor didn't respond right away. The room felt too bright. The sunlight coming through the glass walls made everything sharp. Edges, shadows, expressions. "The bank came yesterday," she said. Daniel nodded, slowly, as if confirming something expected. I know, you know. He leaned back again, folding his hands across his stomach. I was hoping to explain it to you before they did, he said, but things moved faster than I thought. Eleanor looked at him. Not the way she used to. Not as her younger brother. Just as a man sitting across from her. What did I sign? She asked. Daniel exhaled, a small, controlled breath. It was a second mortgage, he said. A leveraged asset agreement. I used the equity in your house to back an investment. Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly. You told me it was for taxes. It was related to taxes, he said quickly, in a broader sense. She shook her head, slow and steady. No, she said. Don't do that. The room went quiet. Daniel's expression shifted, just slightly. The softness dropped away. Something firmer took its place. The project didn't work out, he said. The market turned. Investors pulled out. It happens. You used my house. I used available capital. You used my house, she repeated. He didn't answer that. Instead, he leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. You signed the documents, he said. Everything was legal. The words landed flat. Cold. Eleanor felt something inside her settle. Not break. Not shatter. Just settle. Like dust after a fall. I didn't understand them, she said. That's not my responsibility. There it was. Clear. Simple. Final. Eleanor looked down at the surface of the desk. It was smooth, polished. No marks, no history, nothing like the table in her kitchen. How much? She asked. Daniel hesitated. About 180,000, he said. The number didn't mean much to her. Not really. It was too large, too far away from the kind of thinking she had done all her life. What happens now? She asked. You move out, he said. The bank takes possession. We'll see what we can recover. We. The word didn't fit. Eleanor nodded once. Then she turned. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. There was nothing left in the room to argue with. Behind her, Daniel spoke again. Walt. She paused at the door, but didn't turn around. You should have read the documents, he said. She stood there for a moment. Then she walked out. The air outside felt warmer. Real. Eleanor took a breath as she stepped off the curb. Rufus was already standing in the car, his front paws braced against the door, watching her. When she opened it, he moved immediately, pressing close as she settled into the seat. It's all right, she said. He didn't believe her. She started the engine. The drive home passed in silence. No radio, no words, just the steady sound of the road beneath the tires. Halfway back, she realized she had missed a turn. She slowed, looking around. For a moment, nothing looked familiar. Then it did. She corrected the car and continued. Her hands stayed tight on the wheel. When the house finally came into view, it looked exactly the same as it had that morning. The same porch, the same windows, the same quiet. She pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. Neither of them moved right away. Rufus sat still, his eyes on her. Eleanor stared ahead. I should have read them, she said quietly. The words felt strange. Not wrong. Just too late. She opened the door. The house waited, silent, unchanged, and no longer hers. Eleanor stood just inside the doorway, her hand still resting on the knob. For a moment, she thought about stepping back outside, just leaving. But there was nowhere to go. Rufus moved past her, padding into the house like he always did, pausing in the middle of the room before turning to look at her, waiting. She closed the door. The sound echoed slightly this time, or maybe she was just listening differently. "All right," she said under her breath. Her voice didn't carry far. She set her purse down on the small table by the wall and stood there looking around again. The same rooms, the same furniture, the same quiet. But now there was a number attached to everything. 30 days. It sat in the back of her mind, steady and unblinking. She walked into the living room and sat down in the old armchair. The leather creaked softly under her weight. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers folded together. Rufus came over and lay at her feet, but not fully relaxed. His head stayed up, eyes moving between her and the room. She sat like that for a long time, not thinking, not planning, just sitting. Eventually, she leaned forward and pressed her palms against her knees. "Let's start," she said. The words felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. She stood up slowly and went to the hallway closet. Inside there were boxes, old ones, some still folded flat, others holding things she hadn't touched in years. Holiday decorations, spare linens, things that had once mattered more. She pulled one out and set it on the floor. It took her a moment to remember how to open it. The flaps resisted at first, stiff from time. Then they gave way. She carried the box into the kitchen and set it on the table. The same table. She paused, her hand resting on the edge. Then she turned away. She didn't start with the large things, not the furniture, not the pieces that had shaped the rooms. Instead, she moved slowly, picking up smaller items, things she could carry, things that felt like they belonged to her. A chipped teacup from the cabinet, the one with the thin crack along the side that she had never thrown away. She held it in her hands for a moment, turning it slightly, her thumb tracing the line of the crack. "You've lasted longer than you should have," she murmured. She placed it carefully into the box. Next, a folded dish towel, then another. She paused over each one, as if deciding whether it had earned its place. Rufus followed her from room to room. He didn't lie down this time. He stayed close. When she bent down to open a lower cabinet, he stood beside her. When she moved to the sink, he shifted with her, always watching, always waiting. She moved into the living room. The photograph on the side table caught her eye again. She picked it up. Her husband's face looked back at her, younger, steady, familiar in a way that felt almost painful now. "We did all right," she said quietly. The room didn't answer. She slipped the photograph into the box. Hours passed without her noticing. The light outside changed slowly, moving across the floor, climbing the walls, then fading back again. At some point, she opened the drawer beneath the bookshelf. Inside, there were things she hadn't touched in years. Old letters, a few receipts, a small bundle of keys she no longer recognized, and beneath them, the Bible. It was heavier than she remembered. The leather cover was worn smooth at the edges. The corners softened from years of handling. A faint scent rose from it when she lifted it. Paper, dust, something older than both. She held it in both hands. For a moment, she thought about putting it back. She hadn't opened it in a long time. Not since... She didn't finish the thought. Rufus stepped closer. His nose lifted slightly, catching the scent, then lowering again as he watched her. "It's just a book," she said. But her voice didn't sound certain. She carried it to the table and set it down beside the box. The leather made a soft sound against the wood. She stood there, looking at it. Then, slowly, she opened it. The pages shifted with a dry whisper. Thin. Delicate. She flipped through them without really reading, her fingers brushing lightly over the text. Names she recognized, passages she had heard before. Her hands slowed. Something felt different, a slight unevenness between the pages. She paused. Rufus's ears lifted. She turned back a few pages, more carefully this time. There, something folded, tucked deep between the thin sheets. For a second, she didn't touch it. Her hand hovered above the page. Then she slid her fingers beneath the fold and lifted it free. The paper was old, thicker than the pages of the book, yellowed slightly at the edges. It had been there a long time. As it came loose, it slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. Rufus reacted instantly. He stepped forward, nose down, sniffing at it, his posture shifting, alert, focused, as if something about it mattered. "Easy," Eleanor said, bending down. She picked it up. The paper felt different in her hands, not like the documents from the bank, not cold, not official. This one felt personal. She straightened slowly, holding it carefully. For a moment, she just looked at it, didn't open it, didn't move. The house was quiet around her. Too quiet. Rufus stood close, his eyes fixed on the paper, then lifting to her face. "Let's see," she said softly. But she didn't open it yet. Not right away. Instead, she placed it on the table, next to the box, next to the life she was packing away. She sat down in the chair again. Her hands rested on either side of the paper. The light outside was fading now, the edges of the room softening as evening settled in. Rufus lowered himself slowly to the floor beside her, but his head remained up, his gaze steady. Eleanor looked at the folded page. Whatever it was, it had been waiting. All this time. And she had never known. Eleanor sat very still, her hands resting on the table, the folded paper between them. The room had grown dim without her noticing. The last of the daylight slipped through the window, stretching thin across the surface of the table, catching the edges of the box, the worn leather of the Bible, the small crease in the paper. Rufus shifted closer. Not restless this time. Focused. His nose lifted slightly, then lowered again toward the table. His ears stayed forward, alert in a quiet, steady way. Eleanor let out a slow breath. "All right," she said. She reached for the paper. It made a faint sound as she lifted it, the dry crackle of something that had been folded too long. Her fingers traced the crease before she unfolded it carefully, one side at a time. Inside, not what she expected. Not documents, not anything official. A map. Hand-drawn. Simple lines, rough edges. A road that curved, then narrowed. A few small markings along the way. No names, no labels, just shapes and direction. And beneath it, a few words, written in ink that had faded slightly, but still clear enough to read. Eleanor leaned closer. Her breath caught before she even finished the sentence. She knew that handwriting. She didn't need to read the name. She knew. If things ever go wrong, trust this place. The words sat there. Quiet. Certain. Eleanor didn't move. For a moment, the room felt too small, the air too thin. She reached out and touched the ink lightly with her fingertip, as if it might smudge, as if it might disappear. It didn't. Rufus let out a low breath beside her, not quite a sound, more like a shift in weight. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. "No," she said softly. But it wasn't denial. It was disbelief. Her eyes moved over the paper again, the lines, the turns. Something about it felt familiar, though she couldn't place it, like a memory just out of reach. She looked back at the words. If things ever go wrong, he had written that. Her husband. Years ago, maybe more. She swallowed slowly. "What did you mean?" she murmured. The house didn't answer. Of course it didn't. But the question stayed there, hanging between her and the page. She picked up the map again, holding it closer this time. The paper smelled faintly of something old, not unpleasant, just stored, kept, hidden. She turned it slightly, studying the direction of the lines. A road leading out, then narrowing. Then, something at the end. A shape. A square, maybe. Or a structure. She couldn't be sure. "Where is this?" she asked, more to herself than anything else. Rufus stood up. He moved around the table, stopping beside her chair. His nose came close to the paper again, sniffing carefully, then lifting toward her hand. "You don't know either," she said, but he didn't seem uncertain. He seemed attentive, as if something about it had meaning. Eleanor folded the paper again, slower this time, more carefully. Her fingers lingered on the crease. "How long has this been here?" she asked. The Bible lay open beside her, its pages still parted where the paper had been hidden. She looked at it. At the thin pages. At the place where she had not looked in years. Not since. She stopped the thought again. There were too many of those now. She closed the Bible gently. The sound was soft, final. For a moment, she sat there, the folded paper in her hand, the weight of it settling into her palm. Then she stood. Rufus moved with her instantly. She walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the yard stretched out in the fading light. The garden, the fence, the line of trees beyond it. Everything she knew. Everything she had stayed within. For decades. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, older than she felt, or maybe just more aware. If things ever go wrong, she repeated the words quietly. They didn't feel like instructions. They felt like something else. Preparation. A thought that had come long before this moment. A possibility he had considered. She turned away from the window. The paper was still in her hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, though she already knew the answer might not come. Rufus walked ahead of her, then stopped near the front door, glancing back. Waiting. Eleanor paused. Her eyes moved from him, to the door, and back again. "No," she said. "Not yet." She wasn't ready. Instead, she returned to the table. She picked up the box she had been filling. Set it aside. The paper stayed where it was. Unpacked, unsorted. Different from everything else. She sat down again. Her hands rested flat on the wood, on either side of it. The house creaked softly around her, the sound settling into the walls like it always had. But something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. A question had taken root. Quiet. Persistent. She didn't know where the map led. She didn't know what she would find. But for the first time since the knock on the door, the future didn't feel completely empty. Just uncertain. And waiting. Rufus lay down beside her chair again, but this time his body relaxed slightly, his breathing slower, more even. Eleanor reached down and rested her hand on his head. He didn't move. They stayed like that for a while. The paper between them, the silence holding. And somewhere beneath it all, a path she had never seen before, now placed in her hands. Eleanor didn't sleep much that night. The paper stayed on the table, untouched after she folded it again. She left it there, as if moving it might change something about it. As if it might disappear the way certain thoughts do when you look at them too long. Rufus stayed closer than usual. He didn't settle fully into sleep either. He shifted positions, lifting his head now and then, listening to the quiet in a way that felt different, not anxious, just aware. By morning, the decision had already been made. Not all at once, not in a single clear thought. It came in pieces. The way she stood at the sink, staring out at the yard. The way her hand drifted back to the table. The way her eyes kept finding the folded paper. There was nothing left here to hold her. That realization didn't come with force. It came with stillness. She picked up the map. Rufus was on his feet before she turned around. "You know something, don't you?" she said quietly. He didn't answer, of course, but his posture changed. His body leaned forward slightly, his focus narrowing. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the pocket of her coat. Then she moved. Not quickly, but with purpose. The house looked different when she left it that morning. Not in shape, not in structure, but in the way she looked at it. She paused on the porch, her hand resting on the railing. The paint was chipped beneath her fingers. She had meant to fix that last spring. "I'll come back," she said. She didn't know if that was true. Rufus stood beside her, facing the yard, his ears forward. "Come on," she added. They walked to the car. The door opened with the same familiar sound. The seat felt the same beneath her. Everything still worked the way it always had. She started the engine. The sound was steady. Reliable. She pulled out of the driveway slowly, her eyes moving once more across the house, the yard, the garden. Then she turned onto the road. At first, everything was familiar. The same route she had taken into town. The same turns, the same landmarks. The mailbox at the corner with the faded red paint. The stretch of road where the pavement dipped slightly near the bend. But this time, she didn't turn toward town. She kept going. The map rested on the seat beside her. She glanced at it only briefly, trusting the shape of the road, the way it curved and opened, the way it felt under the tires. Rufus sat upright, his body angled forward. He wasn't relaxed. He wasn't tense either. He was attentive, as if something ahead mattered. "You've never been this way either," she said. But her voice held less certainty now. The houses began to thin out. Fewer driveways, more open land, fences that leaned slightly, weathered by time. The trees grew closer to the road, their branches stretching overhead, filtering the light into softer, shifting patterns. Eleanor slowed slightly. The pavement changed. The smooth surface gave way to something rougher. Gravel. The sound beneath the tires shifted, a low crunch that filled the quiet space inside the car. She checked the map again. The line curved here, just like the road. "All right," she murmured. Rufus's ears flicked forward. They drove on. The gravel road narrowed. Grass crept in at the edges, brushing lightly against the sides of the tires. The air outside looked different somehow, clearer, less touched by anything familiar. The smell came through the cracked window pane, damp earth, something green and deep. Eleanor breathed it in slowly. It had been a long time since she had driven without knowing exactly where she was going. A long time since she had allowed herself to follow something uncertain. The road stretched ahead, winding slightly now, rising and falling with the land. She passed a rusted gate, half open. A fallen fence. A mailbox with no name on it. Each detail felt like a marker, though she didn't know for what. Rufus shifted in his seat. He leaned forward more, his nose lifting, catching something in the air. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed ahead. The gravel thinned. The road grew narrower. Then, it changed again. Dirt now. Uneven. The car moved more slowly, the tires adjusting to the softer ground. Small stones popped beneath the wheels, the sound sharp against the otherwise quiet surroundings. Eleanor tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "This is right," she said, though she wasn't sure who she was convincing. The trees closed in on both sides. Tall. Still. Their trunks dark against the light. The road curved again. Then again. Each turn pulling her farther away from everything she knew. The map sat silent beside her. No words, no instructions, just lines, just direction. Rufus let out a low breath. Not a warning. Something else. Recognition, maybe. Eleanor slowed the car to almost a crawl. "This is as far as we go," she said softly. The road ahead narrowed even more, barely more than a path now. The branches leaned low, brushing the windshield as she eased the car forward one last time before stopping. The engine idled for a moment, then returned it off. Silence. Deep. Complete. She sat there, her hands still on the wheel. The world felt different here. Not empty, not abandoned, just untouched. Rufus was already moving. The moment she opened the door, he jumped out, landing lightly on the dirt path. His nose went low, then lifted, then turned toward the trees ahead. He took a few steps forward, stopped, looked back at her. Waiting. Eleanor stepped out of the car. The ground felt uneven beneath her feet. She closed the door behind her, the sound soft, almost swallowed by the trees. "All right," she said again. Rufus turned and moved ahead, not running, not pulling, just leading. Eleanor followed. The leaves crunched underfoot, dry and brittle. The air carried a stillness she hadn't felt before, a kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just full of things she couldn't see. The path curved gently through the trees. She kept her eyes on Rufus, on the way his body moved with certainty, on the way he didn't hesitate. Step by step, she followed, not knowing exactly where it would lead, only knowing it was somewhere she had never been. And somehow it had been waiting for her. Eleanor followed Rufus through the narrow path, her steps slow, careful, her breath steady but shallow. The ground beneath her feet shifted from packed dirt to something softer, layered with fallen leaves that whispered with every step. The trees began to thin. Not suddenly, gradually. Light filtered through in wider patches, breaking the dim green shade into something warmer, something clearer. Rufus stopped. He stood still, his body aligned toward something just beyond the last line of trees. His ears were forward, his posture firm, not tense, just certain. Eleanor took one more step, then another. And then she saw it. A clearing. Not large. Just enough space where the trees had pulled back, opening a quiet pocket in the middle of the woods. And in that space, a house. Small. Set slightly back from the edge of the clearing, as if it had been placed there carefully, not to be seen too quickly. Eleanor stopped walking. Her hand lowered slowly to her side. The house wasn't finished. That was the first thing she noticed. The structure was solid, wooden beams set firmly, the roof sloping down in a way that would carry snow easily. The siding was there, but uneven in places, some boards lighter than others, as if added at different times. A porch extended from the front, its frame complete but the floorboards only partially laid. The steps leading up were simple, worn at the edges, as if they had been used, but not often. Nothing about it was careless. Every piece, every angle felt deliberate, just unfinished. Eleanor took a slow breath. "This isn't," she began, but didn't finish. Rufus moved forward again. He crossed the clearing without hesitation, his paws silent on the ground, his body low but steady. When he reached the edge of the porch, he paused, sniffed once along the base of the steps, then climbed up. Eleanor followed. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not from effort, from something else. The closer she got, the more the details came into focus. The wood was real. Hand-cut. Not perfect. She could see slight variations in the edges, places where the blade had shifted just slightly offline. The grain of the wood ran uneven in spots, catching the light in a way that made each board look distinct. She reached out and touched one. It was rough beneath her fingertips. Not unfinished, just honest. Rufus stood at the door. It was closed, but not locked. He glanced back at her, waiting. Eleanor stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked softly under her weight, a familiar sound, one she had heard all her life in different places, in different houses. She stood in front of the door. Her hand hovered just above the handle. "This can't be right," she whispered. But the words didn't carry doubt. They carried something closer to disbelief. Rufus nudged the door lightly with his nose. It shifted. Just enough. Eleanor placed her hand on the handle and pushed. The door opened slowly. The hinges gave a soft, uneven sound. Inside, stillness. The air held a faint scent of wood, fresh but not new, lived in but not occupied. Light filtered through two small windows, falling across the floor in long, quiet shapes. Eleanor stepped inside. The floor was solid beneath her feet, not finished, but strong. A single room opened before her. Simple. A small table stood near one wall, two chairs beside it, one slightly different from the other, as if added later. In the corner, a narrow counter with a basin set into it. A metal pitcher rested beside it, half filled with water. On the far side of the room, a door stood slightly ajar. Rufus moved ahead of her, his nose low, then lifting as he scanned the space. He wasn't searching. He was confirming. Eleanor walked slowly across the room. Her eyes moved over everything. The table, the chairs, the counter. Nothing elaborate, nothing unnecessary. Just enough. She reached out and touched the back of one of the chairs. It didn't wobble. It didn't shift. It held. She moved toward the window. Outside, the trees framed the clearing, their branches still, their leaves barely moving in the faint breeze. From here, the world looked distant, removed. Safe. Her hand rested on the window frame. The wood there was smoother, handled more. Used. She turned. Her eyes moved to the door at the far side of the room. Rufus stood there now, his head slightly tilted, his body angled toward it. Eleanor walked over. She pushed the door open. Inside, a smaller room. A bed. Simple frame, plain mattress, a folded blanket at the foot. A shelf on the wall with a few items placed carefully. An old lantern, a small stack of folded cloth, a cup. Nothing random. Everything placed. She stepped inside. The air felt different here, quieter, as if this room had been held apart from time. She reached out and touched the edge of the shelf. Her fingers trembled. "Who built this?" she asked softly. But she already knew. Not completely, not fully, but enough. She stepped back into the main room. Her eyes moved again across the space. The tools. She hadn't noticed them at first, stacked neatly along the wall. A saw, a hammer, a box of nails. Not new, not abandoned. Used, cared for. She walked over to them. Her hand hovered above the saw. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. She knew the feel of it already. From another life. From another time. Her throat tightened. "This was planned," she said. Rufus came to stand beside her. He leaned lightly against her leg. She rested her hand on his head. "Not an accident," she added. Her voice was steadier now. Outside, the light had shifted again. Late afternoon. The kind of light that softened everything. Eleanor turned slowly, taking it all in once more. The unfinished porch, the simple furniture, the quiet structure standing alone in the clearing. It wasn't large. It wasn't complete. But it was real, Olid, built to last. Her gaze moved back to the table, to the way the light touched its surface, to the way the room held its shape. She stepped toward it, pulled out one of the chairs, and sat down. The wood creaked softly beneath her. Rufus lay down beside her feet, his body finally relaxing, his breathing slowing. Eleanor placed her hands on the table. Flat. Steady. She looked around one more time. Not as a visitor, not as someone passing through, but as someone beginning to understand. This place had not been left behind. It had been kept, and it had been waiting. For her. Eleanor didn't move for a long time. Her hands stayed flat on the table, her eyes moving slowly from one corner of the room to the other, taking in what she had already seen, and what she hadn't yet understood. Rufus lay quietly at her feet. For the first time since the knock on the door days ago, his body had softened. His breathing was slow, even, not alert, not searching, settled. Eleanor noticed that. "You like it here," she said softly. He didn't lift his head, but his tail moved once against the floor. She leaned back slightly in the chair. The house held a quiet that felt different from the one she had left behind. That house had been full of memory. This one was full of intention. She stood up slowly. Her joints protested, but she didn't stop. There was more here. She could feel it. She moved toward the far wall, where the tools had been stacked. A hammer, worn at the handle. A saw, cleaned but used. A small wooden box with nails sorted into sections, each one placed carefully. She crouched slightly, her fingers brushing the edge of the box. This wasn't rushed, she murmured. Everything had been done with time, with patience. She stood again and looked around. Her eyes landed on a narrow shelf just above the counter. It was easy to miss, tucked slightly into the wall, almost blending into the boards behind it. She stepped closer. There were a few items there. A tin cup, a folded cloth, and beneath them, paper. Several pieces stacked. She reached for them. Rufus lifted his head. Not tense, just watching. Eleanor pulled the papers free and carried them to the table. She sat down again. Carefully. The chair creaked beneath her. She unfolded the first page. Numbers. Small notes written in careful handwriting. Dates. Amounts. Lumber. Nails, paint. Simple entries written in a way that felt methodical, almost quiet. She turned the page. More of the same. Then, a different kind of note. Shorter. Less structured. Frame started today. The handwriting. Her breath caught. She knew it. She knew it the same way she had known the note in the Bible. Without question. Without doubt. Her fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. You, she whispered. She turned another page. Roofline adjusted, wind stronger than expected. Another. Door frame off by half an inch. Fixed. Another. Thought about her today. Wonder if she'd like the window facing west. Eleanor stopped. Her eyes lingered on that line. The window. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping lightly against the floor. She walked to the window. The one she had stood beside earlier. The one that faced out over the clearing. The one where the light now stretched long and golden across the floor. Her hand lifted slowly and rested on the frame. He built this, she said. Not a question. A statement. Rufus stood and came beside her again, pressing gently against her leg. Eleanor turned back to the table. Her movements were slower now, heavier. She picked up the rest of the pages. There were more notes, more dates. Years. Spread out. Not constant, but steady. Work done in pieces. Time carved out. She reached the last page. It was simpler. Fewer words, still not finished. Then, beneath it, if she ever needs it, it will be enough. Eleanor closed her eyes. Just for a moment. The room seemed to tilt slightly, not from dizziness, but from something deeper, something shifting. You knew, she said quietly. Her voice barely carried. You knew something might happen. She sat down again. The papers rested in her hands, no longer just paper, not just records. Proof of time, of effort, of something done without her seeing. Her gaze moved around the room again, this time differently. Not just seeing what was there, but seeing how it had come to be. The uneven edges of the boards, the careful placement of each piece, the adjustments, the corrections. This wasn't built by someone guessing. This was built by someone who had learned, who had practiced, who had taken time to get it right. Her chest tightened. He didn't do this all at once, she said. Rufus remained still, He came back, she continued, again and again. She looked at the tools, at the notes, at the structure around her. Then something else caught her eye. Near the door, a small stack of wood, cut, split, neatly arranged. Too neat, too recent. She stood again, walked over. She crouched slightly, touching one of the pieces. It wasn't old. The surface was still rough where it had been split. She looked toward the counter, the pitcher of water. Not empty, not stagnant. Recently, her eyes moved slowly across the room again. "This place isn't," she began. She didn't finish, because she understood. Not abandoned, maintained, quietly, without notice, without recognition. Rufus stepped toward the door and looked out into the clearing. Eleanor followed him. The light outside had shifted further now, the sky softening into the early colors of evening. The trees stood still. The clearing remained silent. But it didn't feel empty. It felt held. She stepped onto the porch again. The boards creaked beneath her feet. She looked out over the land. Somewhere, someone had known this place, had cared for it, had kept it from fading away. She didn't know who. Not yet. But she knew this. She hadn't been the only one thinking about this house, and she hadn't been the only one waiting for it to matter. Rufus stood beside her, his body angled toward the trees, his gaze steady. Eleanor rested her hand on his back. The warmth grounded her. "You weren't surprised," she said. He glanced up at her briefly, then back toward the woods, as if listening, as if aware of something she couldn't yet see. Eleanor took a slow breath. The fear she had felt days ago hadn't disappeared. But it had changed. It no longer pressed in on her from all sides. Now, it sat beside something else. Something steadier. She turned back toward the house. The small, unfinished structure. The place that had been built without her knowing. Without her asking. Without her seeing. And yet, exactly where she needed it to be. She stepped inside again. Not as someone lost, not as someone searching, but as someone beginning to understand what had been done. And why. The house held its quiet. But now, it felt like it was beginning to speak. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, listening. Not for a voice, not for something she could name, just listening. The house held its quiet around her, steady and grounded. Every surface, every mark, every uneven edge carried a kind of presence now. Not empty, not forgotten. Known. Rufus moved toward the doorway again. His posture changed first. Subtle. His head lifted higher, his ears sharpened forward, his body angled toward the clearing outside, muscles tightening just slightly. Eleanor noticed. "What is it?" she asked. Rufus didn't move. Then, a sound. Faint. Distant. Not part of the woods. Not wind. Something mechanical. Eleanor stepped onto the porch. The evening light had softened into a muted gold. The trees stood quiet, their leaves barely stirring. For a moment, she thought she might have imagined it. Then she heard it again. An engine. Far off. But coming closer. Her hand tightened slightly against the railing. "No," she whispered. Rufus let out a low sound. Not a growl, but close to it. His body moved forward a step, placing himself between her and the path. The sound grew louder. Gravel, tires. Someone knew the way. Eleanor stepped down from the porch. She didn't retreat inside. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the narrow path where she had come through. The engine slowed, then stopped. Silence followed for a second. Then a car door opened, closed. Footsteps, measured, familiar. Daniel stepped into view. He looked different. Not entirely, but enough. The sharpness he had carried in his office was softened now. His suit was gone, replaced by something simpler, less controlled. His hair slightly out of place, his face drawn. But his eyes, still searching, still calculating. "Walt," he said. The name landed the same way it always had, but it didn't feel the same. Eleanor didn't respond. Rufus stood firm at her side, his body angled forward, watching Daniel closely. Daniel glanced at the dog, then back at her. "I had to ask around," he continued. "The property records, the old filings. It wasn't hard to find once I knew where to look." Eleanor's voice came quiet. "You followed me." "I followed the paperwork," he said. He stepped forward slightly, stopping just short of the edge of the clearing. His eyes moved past her. To the house. For a moment, something shifted in his expression. Surprise, then interest, then something else. "Well," he said slowly, "I didn't expect this." Eleanor didn't turn. She already knew what he was seeing. "What do you want?" she asked. Daniel exhaled, running a hand over the back of his neck. "I came to talk," he said. Rufus's ears flicked. Eleanor remained still. "There's a way to fix this," Daniel continued. "This place, it's worth something. More than you think, land like this. Even unfinished." He paused, choosing his words. "We could sell it. Clean things up. Split what's left." Eleanor's fingers curled slightly against her palm. "Split," she repeated. Daniel nodded. "I can make the calls. I know people who'd move fast on this. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. We can turn this around." Eleanor finally turned to look at him fully. Not as a brother, not as someone she trusted, just as the man standing in front of her. "You already turned it," she said. Her voice was calm. Even. Daniel's expression tightened slightly. "That was different," he said quickly. "That was business. This is recovery." "Recovery," she echoed. Rufus shifted his weight, pressing slightly closer to her leg. Daniel took another step forward. "Walt, listen to me," he said. "You can't stay out here. There's no infrastructure, no proper utilities. This isn't a solution. It's a temporary situation at best." Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't come here for a solution," she said. Daniel frowned. "Then what did you come for?" She glanced briefly toward the house, then back at him. "It was already here," she said. He followed her gaze again, studying the structure more carefully this time. "Yeah," he said slowly. "And that's exactly why it matters. This is an asset. We can use it." Eleanor shook her head. "No." The word was simple, quiet, final. Daniel blinked. "Don't be like this," he said. "I'm trying to help you." Rufus let out a low, steady breath. Eleanor's voice remained steady. "You helped already." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Look," he said, his tone shifting, less patient now. "You're not thinking clearly. You've been through a shock. I get that. But this is exactly the kind of mistake that makes things worse. Eleanor didn't move, didn't react. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The trees stood quiet around them. The light shifted again, deepening into evening. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "You said I should have read the papers." Daniel hesitated. "Yes." She nodded once. Slowly. "I'm reading now." The words landed differently. Daniel's expression faltered. Just for a second. Eleanor took a step forward. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just closer. "This was built," she said, gesturing lightly toward the house, "for a reason." Daniel didn't answer. "You didn't see it," she continued. "You didn't know about it. You didn't think to look." Her voice stayed calm, but something beneath it had changed, something firm. "This isn't yours," she said. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "It's not yours either," he replied. "Not legally." Eleanor held his gaze. For a moment, the old hesitation flickered. Then it passed. "No," she said. "It isn't." She paused, then added, "But I'm here." The words settled between them. Daniel looked at her, searching for something. Uncertainty, doubt, anything he could work with. He didn't find it. The clearing held its silence. Rufus stood unmoving, his presence steady, grounded. Daniel exhaled slowly. "This isn't over," he said. Eleanor didn't respond. He waited. A second. 2. Then he turned, walked back toward the path. His steps were slower now, less certain. The sound of the car door echoed faintly. The engine started, then faded, gone. Eleanor remained where she stood, her body still, her breathing steady. The tension that had filled the air slowly dissolved. Rufus relaxed first. His posture softened, though his eyes remained on the path for a moment longer, before finally turning back to her. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned toward the house. The unfinished porch, the quiet structure, still standing, still waiting. But now, it wasn't just waiting. It was holding. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, she felt something hold back. Not the past, not what had already been taken, but the quiet sense that she might not fall any further. Eleanor stood in the clearing long after the sound of Daniel's car had disappeared. The evening settled slowly around her, the light thinning into a soft blue that stretched between the trees. Rufus stayed beside her, not watching the road anymore, watching her. She reached down and rested her hand against his neck, her fingers pressing lightly into his fur. "It's all right," she said. This time the words felt closer to the truth. They went inside as the light faded. The small house held its warmth, even without a fire. The walls carried the day's heat, the air steady and still. Eleanor moved through the space slowly, no longer uncertain of where to step. She knew the room now. The table, the chair, the small counter, the door to the sleeping space. Each piece had settled into place in her mind, not as something borrowed, but as something she could use. She lit the lantern on the shelf. The soft glow spread outward, touching the walls, the floor, the edges of the room. Shadows moved gently, not sharp, not threatening. Rufus circled once near the door and lay down, his body stretched across the threshold as if marking it. Guarding. but not tense. Eleanor sat at the table. Her hands rested there again, the same way they had earlier, but this time they didn't feel out of place. She looked around, at the unfinished edges, at the careful work, at the marks left behind by hands that had built something piece by piece. "You didn't rush it," she said quietly. The words felt like they belonged in the room. She leaned back slightly in the chair, her eyes drifting toward the window. The last light of the day lingered there. Faint. Golden. It stretched across the floor just enough to catch the grain of the wood, the uneven boards, the places where the work had been corrected, adjusted, improved. It wasn't perfect, but it held. That mattered more. The next morning came softer. No sharp waking, no jolt. Eleanor opened her eyes slowly, the unfamiliar ceiling above her now less foreign than it had been the night before. Rufus was already awake. He stood near the door, his posture relaxed, his tail low but loose. When she moved, he turned toward her, his ears lifting just slightly. "Morning," she said. Her voice sounded different here, less strained. She sat up, taking a moment before standing. The air felt cool, clean. She stepped into the main room and opened the door. The clearing stretched out before her, quiet and still. No cars, no voices, no interruptions. Just the trees, the light filtering through them, the faint sound of something distant, maybe wind, maybe leaves shifting far away. She stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under her weight, the sound familiar already. Rufus followed, standing beside her, his body angled outward, scanning, then settling. Eleanor looked out across the clearing. "This will do," she said. It wasn't a declaration. It was an acceptance. The days began to take shape. Not all at once, not in any planned way. She started with small things. Cleaning a corner of the counter, rinsing the basin, straightening the items on the shelf. Each task simple, each movement steady. Rufus adapted quickly. He learned the edges of the clearing, the line where the trees grew thicker, the places where the ground shifted slightly underfoot. He moved with confidence now, no longer searching, just aware. At night, he returned to the doorway, always the doorway, always between her and the outside. Eleanor noticed that. "You've chosen your spot," she said one evening. He looked at her briefly, then lowered his head again. She found more small things as the days passed. A second blanket folded in a corner she hadn't noticed. A small stack of firewood tucked behind the house. A metal cup hanging from a nail just outside the door. Each one placed with intention. Each one left quietly. She didn't question it. Not yet. Instead, she used what was there, accepted it, let it become part of the rhythm. One afternoon, she sat by the window again, the same place, the same light, but everything felt different. She held the old Bible in her lap, her fingers resting on the worn leather cover. She didn't open it right away. She just held it. The weight of it. The presence of it. Rufus lay nearby, his breathing slow, steady. The room held its quiet. Not empty. Not waiting. Just present. Eleanor finally opened the Bible. Not searching this time. Not looking for anything hidden. Just reading. The words came slowly. Not all of them clear. Not all of them easy to follow. But that didn't matter. She wasn't reading for answers. She was reading because it felt right to sit there and do it, because it connected her to something that had been placed in her hands long before she understood why. That evening, she stepped outside again. The sky had begun to shift into deeper colors, the blue fading toward something softer, something dimmer. She sat on the edge of the porch. Rufus settled beside her. The air carried a faint chill now. She wrapped her arms lightly around herself and looked out across the clearing. At the trees, at the quiet, at the place that had been waiting. She thought about the house she had left behind, the walls, the rooms, the life that had filled them. She didn't push the thoughts away. She let them come and let them pass. Her eyes returned to the small house behind her, the unfinished edges, the steady frame, the space that had been built without her knowing, without asking, without explanation. And now here she was, not because she had chosen it at the beginning, but because it had been there when she needed it. Rufus shifted slightly, pressing closer. Eleanor rested her hand against his back. "You stayed," she said. He didn't move, didn't need to. She looked out one more time, the last light slipping away, the first hint of night settling in. And in that quiet, steady space, she understood something she hadn't seen before, not as a lesson, not as a conclusion, just as a truth that had taken time to arrive. Sometimes, what you lose isn't the end of your life. Sometimes, it's the moment that reveals what was already being built, quietly, somewhere you never thought to look. Eleanor sat there a while longer. Then she stood, went inside, closed the door gently behind her, and for the first time, it felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Eleanor stood by the window as the last light settled across the floor, the same way it had the day she first walked in, only now she didn't feel like a visitor inside someone else's plan. She set the Bible down beside her, not carefully, just naturally. Rufus moved first.
He walked to the doorway, then back to her, then to the window, like he had the first day, until she followed without thinking, until she stood where the lights came in, where the house opened outward instead of closing in. He hadn't found a map, he hadn't read a single word, but he knew where to stand, he knew where to go, he knew when something was still unfinished. Eleanor looked around the small room, the uneven walls, the marks left behind, the space that had been built in quiet, piece by piece, without her ever seeing it. She had spent years believing that what she had was on there was, that when it was gone, so was everything that mattered. But something had been waiting, not louder, not bigger, just patient. She reached down and rested her hand on Rufus again, this time not for comfort, just because you were there. Outside, the trees didn't move, the world didn't change, but something inside her had already shifted into place, and as the light faded, she found herself wondering how many of us had already been given a place to land, but never thought to look for it.